Chapter 1. Day 1. Punch the grass, they said. He woke up in the dirt. Not on the dirt, mind you, in it. Face first, mouth full of grit and what he desperately hoped was just decomposed leaves. The taste of earth and misery coated his tongue as he spat and rolled over, squinting against the harsh morning sun that seemed personally offended by his existence. No memory, no name, no pants, just a pair of tighty-whities that had seen better days and a small backpack strapped to his shoulders. The underwear clung to him like a white flag of surrender, stretched and stained with what he desperately hoped was just dirt. The backpack felt surprisingly light, as if mocking him with its emptiness. A feeling deep in his bowels suggested that something was fundamentally, catastrophically off with his world. Above him, birds chirped with the kind of cheerful persistence that made him want to throw rocks. The soft rustle of wind through grass created an almost musical backdrop to what should have been a peaceful morning. Idyllic, serene, picture perfect, absolutely horrifying. Then it hit him like a revelation written in crayon. He had to punch the grass. He didn't know why he knew that. It wasn't like he remembered learning it in school or reading it in some survival manual. The knowledge just sat there in his brain, like the last functioning neuron in a house fire, offering up this single, inexplicable truth. Day 1, punch grass and trees, don't die. So he did what any rational person would do when faced with complete amnesia and an overwhelming urge to assault vegetation. He punched the grass like it owed him money from a poker game gone wrong. His knuckles scraped against the earth, dirt embedding itself under his fingernails as he flailed at the green blades with the desperate intensity of a man who had clearly lost his mind. Each swing of his fist yielded tiny fragments of plant fiber, pathetic wisps that looked like the world's most disappointing confetti. When the grass had been sufficiently traumatized, he moved on to a nearby tree. The oak stood there, minding its own business, probably thinking about photosynthesis or whatever trees contemplated during their centuries of existence. He punched it until his hands bled and screamed with wooden splinters, each impact sending shockwaves up his arms that reminded him he was very much not designed for this kind of activity. A small pile of fiber and wood chunks slowly accumulated in front of him like some caveman's resume. If that caveman had flunked out of caveman college and was now working temp jobs. The pile was pathetic, really. A squirrel could have gathered more building materials in half the time. But somehow, through what could only be described as muscle memory from a life he couldn't remember, his hands began to work. The fiber twisted together, wood shaped itself under his bleeding fingers, and eventually, miraculously, he crafted a stone axe. It looked like something a toddler would bring home from summer camp, proudly declaring, "I made this for you, Dad," while the counselor mouthed, "I'm so sorry," in the background. The handle was crooked, the stone head was lopsided, and the binding looked like it might give up at any moment. But when he swung it at a nearby branch, it actually chopped. Kinda. Emboldened by this marginal success, he crafted a wooden club, essentially a stick with delusions of grandeur, and a bow that looked like it had been designed by someone who had heard about archery but never actually seen it done. The arrows he managed to create were barely more than sharpened twigs with stone points that seemed more likely to fall off than penetrate anything meaningful. He looked down at his crude inventory and grunted with something that might have been pride if it weren't so pitiful.
Progress,
he muttered to himself, the word tasting strange in his mouth. In the distance, a strange shape loomed against the horizon, a structure of some kind jutting up from the landscape like a metallic middle finger. Civilization? Shelter? A giant blender designed to process human hope into disappointment? Only one way to find out. He started walking, his bare feet finding every sharp rock and thorny branch the earth had to offer. The tighty-whities provided zero protection from the undergrowth, which seemed to take personal delight in scratching at his legs. Every step was a small adventure in pain and humiliation. The morning air was crisp, carrying scents of pine and wildflowers that might have been pleasant under different circumstances. A rabbit darted across his path, paused to stare at him with what looked suspiciously like judgment, then hopped away as if to say, "Not even worth it." Midway through his hike, as the sun climbed higher and his stomach began to rumble with hunger, his body reminded him of a small but significant mistake he had made about 20 minutes earlier, drinking from a shimmering stream that had beckoned to him like a siren's call. The water had looked so refreshing, so clean and clear, reflecting the sky like liquid crystal, so full of promise and hope for hydration. The stream had babbled cheerfully as it flowed over smooth stones, creating tiny waterfalls that caught the morning light like nature's own jewelry. It was not what it appeared to be. The water hit his digestive system like a betrayal wrapped in sewage and garnished with biological warfare. Within seconds, literally seconds, his stomach began to gurgle like a demonic cauldron brewing the world's worst potion. The sound echoed from his midsection with the ominous rumbling of distant thunder, except the storm was happening inside his intestines. He keeled over, clutching his gut as waves of nausea crashed over him.
"Oh no,"
he whispered to the uncaring wilderness.
"Dysentery."
The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Images flashed through his mind: Oregon Trail, covered wagons, pixelated tombstones. He was going to die of dysentery like some pioneer who couldn't figure out how to ford a river. His body responded with the kind of severe diarrhea that suggested his digestive system had been waiting its entire life for this moment of ultimate revenge. It came in waves, each one more urgent and horrifying than the last, turning his morning hike into a desperate sprint between bushes. Bent over, sweating like a marathon runner in hell, groaning with each step and occasionally darting behind convenient vegetation, he crept through the trees with all the dignity of a man whose body had declared war on itself while wearing only underwear. The forest seemed to mock him. Every rustling leaf whispered jokes about his predicament. Every chirping bird sounded like laughter. Up ahead, through his haze of intestinal distress, he spotted movement. A pack of zombies stumbled through the brush like the world's least coordinated flash mob. They moved with the jerky, unnatural gait of broken marionettes, occasionally walking into trees or getting tangled in their own feet. Their moans created a grotesque chorus that somehow managed to be both terrifying and absurd. Their clothes hung in tatters, revealing gray-green skin mottled with decay. One wore what might have once been a business suit, its tie now a noose of rotted fabric. Another shambled along in pajamas decorated with cartoon cats. Somehow, this made it more horrifying than any monster movie he couldn't remember watching. He crouched behind a fallen log, trying to control his breathing while his stomach continued its internal rebellion. The zombies hadn't noticed him yet, too focused on their aimless wandering and occasional attempts to eat grass. He moved slow, staying low, creeping from tree to tree like the world's most underwear-clad ninja. He was almost past them, congratulating himself on his stealth skills, when a sound came from behind that made his blood freeze. Bark. Growl. The kind of deep, rumbling growl that spoke of teeth and hunger and very bad intentions. He turned, moving in slow motion like a horror movie victim who knows exactly how this scene ends. A feral dog stood 10 feet away, muscles coiled for attack. This wasn't some friendly neighborhood golden retriever who wanted belly rubs and tennis balls. This was 30 pounds of fur-covered fury with yellow eyes that held no recognition of humanity's former dominance over the animal kingdom. Its lips pulled back to reveal teeth that looked like they'd been sharpened specifically for ripping flesh from bone. The dog's fur was matted with dirt and what might have been blood. Scars crisscrossed its muzzle, telling stories of fights won and lost. It stood there for a heartbeat, sizing him up like a predator calculating the effort required to bring down its prey. Then it charged. He squealed. And it was definitely a squeal, not a manly shout of defiance. It was the sound a tea kettle makes when it reaches maximum terror. He spun and sprinted, nearly naked and half-digestively destroyed, his bare feet slapping against the forest floor as branches whipped at his face and his stomach continued its liquid revolt. Behind him, he could hear the dog gaining ground, its paws thundering against the earth in steady rhythm. The zombies, alerted by the commotion, began turning toward the sound with the slow inevitability of a bureaucratic nightmare. Ahead, salvation appeared in the form of a large boulder, 8 feet of granite that looked like it had been placed there specifically for this moment. He scrambled up like his life depended on it, because it absolutely did, his fingers finding purchase on the rough stone as the dog launched itself at where his ankles had been a split second before. From his rocky perch, he watched the feral canine circle below, snarling and snapping at the air. The animal paced like a furry shark, occasionally leaping up to scratch at the stone with claws that left white marks on the granite. Its yellow eyes never left him, calculating jump trajectories and waiting for him to make a mistake. With shaking hands, he pulled out his bow, his crooked amateur-hour bow that looked like it had been crafted by someone having an epileptic seizure. He notched one of his pathetic arrows, drew back the string, which creaked ominously, and tried to remember anything about archery that didn't involve dying horribly. The dog paused in its circling as if sensing the shift in dynamics. He aimed, held his breath, and released. Thunk. The arrow buried itself in the dog's side with a wet sound that made his stomach lurch for reasons beyond the dysentery. The animal let out a sharp whimper, stumbled, and looked up at him with something that might have been surprise before collapsing to the forest floor. Silence. He stared down at the still form, feeling a complex mixture of relief, guilt, and nausea. The dog had just been hungry, probably as lost and confused as he was. But in this new world, apparently, everything was trying to kill everything else. And then the zombies noticed. The moaning grew louder, more focused. Gray faces turned toward his boulder with the slow inevitability of cosmic horror. They began shambling in his direction, arms outstretched, moving with the relentless patience of the undead who had nothing but time.
Oh, great,
he muttered, already climbing down the opposite side of the rock.
Just fantastic.
He ran, not jogged, not hurried. Ran like his life was a subscription service he desperately wanted to renew. His bare feet found every root, rock, and thorny bush the forest had strategically placed in his path. Behind him, the moaning grew closer, accompanied by the sound of breaking branches and stumbling footsteps. He sprinted for the nearest structure, the metallic shape he'd spotted earlier, which now resolved itself into something that looked like a compound, surrounded by scrap metal and barbed wire. It was like a post-apocalyptic fortress, designed by someone with access to a junkyard and severe trust issues. A hand-painted sign on the wall, done in what looked suspiciously like dried blood, read, "Trader Rects, no credit, no refunds, no bullshit." He burst through the front door and slammed it shut, throwing his weight against the reinforced metal as something heavy thudded against the other side. The interior was dimly lit by flickering candles and smelled like motor oil, whiskey, and despair. A grizzled man behind a makeshift counter looked up from cleaning a revolver with what might have been motor oil and old bourbon. He had the kind of face that suggested he'd seen things, terrible things, and had probably done quite a few of them himself. His beard looked like it housed small animals, and his eyes held the weary resignation of someone who'd given up on humanity around the same time humanity had given up on itself.
Well, well,
the man sneered, his voice carrying the gravel of too many cigarettes and not enough hope.
If it isn't the world's dumbest scavenger.
The survivor gasped for air, still pressed against the door as something scraped at it from outside. His tighty-whities had somehow managed to collect every thorn, burr, and piece of debris the forest had to offer, making him look like he'd been attacked by a craft store.
Zombies, dog, explosive diarrhea.
Shut up.
The trader tossed a stone shovel at his feet with the casual indifference of someone throwing away trash.
Go dig me something. Got a map. Figure it out, genius.
He blinked, staring down at the shovel like it was an alien artifact.
Are you Trader Wrecked?
No, I'm the Tooth Fairy. Santa Claus, the goddamn Easter Bunny.
The man's voice dripped with sarcasm, thick enough to drown in.
Of course I'm wrecked. Now get lost before you bring more trouble to my doorstep.
A crumpled piece of paper landed next to the shovel, a map marked with a big red X, like something from a children's treasure hunt, if children's treasure hunts involved mortal peril and intestinal distress. Map in hand, shovel clutched like a lifeline, he stumbled back into the woods, following the red X like a dysentery-ridden pirate searching for the world's most disappointing treasure. The zombies had wandered off, apparently distracted by something shinier, leaving only their lingering scent of decay and poor life choices. The dig site turned out to be a patch of disturbed earth behind a wrecked sedan that looked like it had stopped working long before the world did. The car's windows were spiderwebbed with cracks, its tires long since rotted away, leaving it sitting on rusty rims like a monument to better times. He started digging. Time passed in a blur of shoveling, stomach cramps, and existential dread. The sun climbed higher, turning his pale skin pink and then red. Sweat mixed with dirt to create a muddy paste that coated his arms and face. Each shovelful of earth felt heavier than the last, and his hands developed blisters that burst and reformed with metronomic regularity. The hole grew deeper, his optimism grew smaller. Finally, after what felt like hours of manual labor that would have made chain gangs sympathetic, his shovel hit something that wasn't dirt. The metallic clang echoed in the small pit he'd created, and for a moment he felt something that might have been excitement. A buried food stash. The metal box was green with age and rust, its military markings faded but still visible. When he pried it open with his stone axe, the hinges screamed in protest, and the contents were revealed like the world's most underwhelming Christmas morning. Inside, one jar of suspicious soup that smelled like wet dog and regret, with a label so faded he couldn't tell if it had ever been food or some kind of biological experiment. One bottle of murky water that looked like it had been filtered through a gym sock in his grandma's ashtray. One can of peas that might have been manufactured during the Nixon administration, its expiration date worn away by time and the elements. And a small box that had a lock on and had the words written on it, Supply Stash Number 74. He trudged back to Rect's compound, the treasure weighing heavy in his arms and heavier on his spirit. The trader barely looked up when he dropped the loot on the counter with a defeated thud.
Took you long enough,
Recht said, examining the finds with the enthusiasm of someone inspecting roadkill.
You dig like a narcoleptic squirrel with arthritis?
The survivor groaned, too tired to form actual words.
Now, get out. You don't gotta go home, but you can't stay here.
Recht gestured toward the door with his thumb.
You're upsetting my customers and my stomach. And frankly, you smell like you've been rolling in a sewer.
The door slammed shut behind him with the finality of a coffin lid, leaving him alone with the approaching evening and a growing sense that this was his life now. Outside, the sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that would have been beautiful if he weren't slowly dying of dehydration and dread. The forest began its evening transformation from merely dangerous to absolutely terrifying. Then he saw it, a chicken. Small, plump, and somehow managing to look judgmental despite being a bird with a brain the size of a walnut. It pecked at the ground near a cluster of weeds, occasionally pausing to fix him with one beady eye as if to say, "Really? This is what humanity has come to?" He knocked an arrow on his bow, drew back the creaking string, aimed at the bird that represented his first real chance at actual food, and released. Thunk. Direct hit. The chicken let out an indignant squawk and toppled over, its small legs kicking briefly before going still. He jogged over to the twitching poultry, bent down, and, unsure how else to proceed and lacking any memory of food preparation, began smacking it repeatedly with his stone axe. It was not dignified. It was not efficient. But eventually, raw meat, feathers, and small bones spilled out like the world's most tragic piñata. He picked them up and shoved them into his backpack, trying not to think about the fact that he was essentially playing whack-a-mole with dinner. Curious about what else he'd managed to accumulate during his day of survival, he opened his backpack and peered inside. It was packed to bursting, and not with anything remotely useful. The contents defied both logic and inventory management. A single cotton seed.
Where had this come from?
3 rotting sandwiches that smelled like they'd been marinating in maggots. Actually, yeah, they were marinating in maggots. 17 empty cans. Why had he kept these? A bone knife he didn't remember making but looked suspiciously sharp. A brass trophy shaped like a llama with an inscription that read, "World's Okayest Participant." Some duct tape, actually useful, which made it suspicious. 1 broken glass jar filled with what might have been dreams. A wooden chair. A dirty hoodie with a logo for a band he'd never heard of. 1 finger bone of unclear and troubling origin. A rubber duck. 3 bottle caps. A pencil with no eraser. A sock, just 1. He stared into the abyss of random garbage and whispered to the uncaring universe,
What the hell am I even doing?
As night fell with the subtle inevitability of a horror movie's third act, the forest came alive with sounds that made his primitive brain scream warnings about large predators and imminent death. Moans echoed between the trees, distant but getting closer. Growls rumbled from unseen throats. Unexplainable shrieks cut through the air like audio razors, making him jump at shadows and question every life choice that had led him to this moment. He climbed a tall pine with all the grace of a drunk sloth, each branch offering new opportunities for splinters and shame. At 20 feet up, he cobbled together what could generously be called a treehouse out of wooden frames he'd somehow crafted during his day of survival, pure desperation, and what his mother might have called character building, if he could remember having a mother. The structure was an insult to architecture. It swayed with every breath of wind, creaked ominously when he moved, and looked like it had been designed by someone who'd heard about tree houses but had never actually seen one. But it was off the ground, and in this new world, that qualified as luxury accommodation. A small campfire crackled weakly in one corner, a miracle of friction and dry grass that had taken him 47 attempts to achieve. The flames cast dancing shadows on the crude walls, creating a light show that was equal parts comforting and terrifying. He cooked the chicken meat over the fire, managing to burn it into something that resembled coal-flavored jerky but had the texture of futility. The smell of charred poultry filled the tiny space, mixing with the scent of pine sap and his own fear sweat to create an aroma that would haunt his dreams. He pried open the mysterious jar of soup with his stone axe, sniffed the contents, mistake, made a face that would have been comic under different circumstances, then decided that starvation was probably worse than food poisoning. Probably. The soup tasted like someone had boiled sadness in dirty water and seasoned it with bitterness. It had the consistency of liquid defeat and the aftertaste of poor life choices. But it was warm, and his body needed calories, so he forced it down while trying not to think about what might have been floating in it. He washed it down with the 2 bottles of clean water that Recht had grudgingly provided. Apparently, even post-apocalyptic traders drew the line at letting customers die of dehydration on their doorstep. His stomach thanked him for the hydration, even as it continued to plot revenge for the day's liquid betrayals. He sat in his swaying treehouse, listening to the night howl around him like the soundtrack to his own personal horror movie. Somewhere in the darkness below, a zombie screamed at the moon with the passionate futility of someone arguing with customer service. Something large crashed through trees nearby, invisible but close enough to make his pulse race. A vulture screeched overhead, probably placing bets on how long he'd last. He hugged his backpack full of inexplicable nonsense and whispered to the flickering fire.
I don't know where I am. I don't know why I'm here. I don't know what happened to the world, or to me, or why I think punching grass is a reasonable way to gather resources.
The fire popped and crackled, offering no answers.
But I know one thing for absolutely certain.
He looked out at the hostile wilderness that had become his home, at the shadows that held unnamed horrors, at the future that stretched ahead of him like an obstacle course designed by sadistic cosmic forces.
This sucks.
Somewhere in the distance, something howled in agreement.